Deebo Samuel. Breaking news. Bum, 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 bum. Deebo Samuel also being included in trade talks. And so far, he's worth a mid-rounder, which sounds like a third or a fourth round pick. What do you think of this news that Deebo Samuel has been included in some potential trade talks?
Yeah, it's not surprising, Grant, because what was the thing that came out yesterday from Silver that he heard from his boss? The way it was phrased was he had heard from his bosses that he is not going anywhere. Well, I don't know. You tell me, but I'm pretty sure that GMs and coaches don't just call every player before the draft and let them know, hey, just so you know, you're not going to get traded. You're going to be here. That's not the way that it works. The only way that that conversation would happen is if Deebo asked the question. And why would Deebo ask the question? Well, probably because he knows he's being shopped or has been shopped. So, what that tells me is Deebo's very aware of his situation. That also tells me that Deebo Samuel is likely not on this team after this year. That is something that we have speculated about. We assumed, especially if BA gets extended, that Deebo would not be here. But I think ultimately the fact that he has been shopped this offseason, and it makes sense that that is the case based off the Silver article, he knows that the writing is on the wall. This is the final year for Deebo, unless something drastic changes in the next year, which it certainly could. That's a lot of time, but Deebo's probably on his way out.
Yeah, it's like if they're not going to trade him this offseason, but they very well could next year. I think this is kind of like maybe a cautionary example with Brandon Ayuk, not to take it there right away, but like when they extended Deebo Samuel, it was very much because they're in a Super Bowl window and you couldn't get worse. You had to keep him around. Had he had one dominant year, really? Yes. And you paid him as if he'd had more? Yes. And then 2 years down the line, you want to trade him. And what's he worth? A third rounder tops, when 2 years ago, before you gave me extension, he was worth probably a top 20 pick. So, okay, you didn't win a Super Bowl. And now you're thinking it kind of would be nice to trade him, but it's a little too late. Same thing could happen with Brandon Ayuk. 2 years, he'll be 28. If he hasn't replicated this season where he had 1,400 yards or close to it, and now he's making $30 million a year. And it's like, you know what? That's a little bit too much for us. Let's trade him. Like everyone else is going to say it's a little bit too much for us too. We'll give you a fourth. So just keep that in mind.
Well, and I think the Deebo Samuel thing, what was interesting to me is I was looking at all the contracts that they could rework this offseason to free up money. And really none of them were great options. It's why I was frustrated last year when they did this with Eric Armstead. And of course, they move on from Eric Armstead a year early, which he would have been a full-fledged free agent if they hadn't reworked his deal last year. They could have just been scot-free, but they did rework his deal and it put him in a bad situation where now they're going to owe $15.5 million next year for him not to play on the team. Well, when you look at Deebo Samuel's contract, he was the one that was kind of the edge for me where it was like, you could rework Deebo's deal. You probably should because he's making so much money, but you have an out next year when you trade him or cut him or what have you. Well, if you do rework his deal, restructure it, then you're not going to have that out. The fact that they haven't done that this offseason as of yet kind of set the wheels in motion that, hey, Deebo's likely not going to be here. You add in the fact that you most likely can't pay BA, Ayuk, Purdy, everybody. It starts to make a lot of sense. And again, Deebo Samuel is the one that's seeking this question out. This is not something that Lynch is going to go to him and say, hey, just so you know, you're not getting traded. He's going to ask that question. That's how he knows the answer to the question. And why would you ask the question if you didn't think you were on the trade block? He knows he's on the trade block or was on the trade block. So he asked.
Also, he's the one who requested a trade. He's the one who didn't really want to be on this team. So they could give him his trade request just 2 years later. Remember, you asked for this.
Yeah, the other thing too that you have to wonder about is he's such good friends with Kyle Shanahan. Like, do you think Shanahan was just honest with him? Like, hey, just so you know, we're shopping you. Like, do they have that type of relationship? Maybe. Maybe they do. I don't know. But also, cautionary tale. Maybe you shouldn't be friends with your players, and players, you shouldn't be friends with your head coach because ultimately business
Business.
have to happen. Yeah.
It's sobering that he's only worth a mid-round pick, but we shouldn't be surprised. He's 28. He's going to be 29 next season. He really wasn't great in the playoffs, particularly in the Super Bowl. He's a wide receiver who can't beat man-to-man coverage and doesn't have a big catch radius and drops a lot of passes and isn't as fast as he used to be. Like, isn't really running go routes, but he can do a lot. He's like the best guy after the catch in the league. Still, he's a terrible contract. One of the worst contracts in the league, I have to say.
Yeah, it's not it's definitely not very good. It's not very good. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's should be a sobering reminder to 49er fans as well that, not only do you have to start looking at the 39 unrestricted free agents next year, but Deebo Samuel, aging and expensive. Trent Williams, aging and expensive. George Kittle, aging and expensive. Hargrave, aging and expensive. It's not just the 39 unrestricted free agents. It's all these other players that might be on the move as well. So this team's going to look very, very different come next season. It really is.
Also, the wide receiver market is so interesting to me because on the one hand, you have the guys in their prime, 26, when it comes to getting an extension, just getting crazy money. One after another, it's record setting. So the market has exploded as if there's like a shortage of supply. But in the draft every year, there's like 7 or 8 guys who, deep into the second round, it looks like there's really good talent. So it seems like if it's that expensive to have an elite wide receiver, shouldn't you want to have guys on rookie deals, like as many as possible? And do you really want 2 elite of these guys? How much they're making? It's going to be like $60 million combined.
Well, one thing you can look at across the league. You've got Kansas City was just won back-to-back Super Bowls. It wasn't in. They had a decision to make 2 years ago with Tyreek still in his prime. They traded him to South Beach. They went back to 2 Super Bowls. The Packers, they got rid of Devontae Adams probably a year earlier than most people would expect. Devontae's still producing. Doesn't matter. Packers are right back. They're ready to compete again. So, when you get rid of these big name receivers, as long as you do a good job drafting, you're going to be okay. And both of those teams draft very well. And so that's why they're in a position where they can continue to compete. The question is, if you get rid of Brandon Ayuk, are the 49ers, especially in round 1, they've done a good job drafting overall, but in round 1, can they make that mark? I don't know. I don't know that they can. It's been very hit and miss thus far.
And before we move on from this one, again, the reason the Niners decided to give Deebo Samuel almost $24 million is they felt that while they didn't give him, 150 targets a year, that he was going to be a big part of the run game too. And when you added it all together, it was going to be worth $24 million a year. And it's not, because he's not that kind of running back. They went and got McCaffrey. He's not really involved in the run game that much anymore. He doesn't block. He's just not worth it. So keep that in mind. Brandon Ayuk, are you sure you can get the most out of his contract when you bring him back? Because you know what the price tag is. You see it.